definitely seems to have implications that will hopefully bring more people to jailbreaking their consoles now. Not only that, but might also attract more hackers to the scene to actually exploit the console on higher firmwares and open up the console even more, which would be fantastic. So basically what's been happening, I'll do a quick recap here on everything that's been going on. So first of all, PlayStation removed the purchased movies from people's libraries, so not rentals, but movies that had been fully purchased, as they chose not to renew the licenses with the movie studios. They have the right to do this because the license that you purchase has terms and conditions that allow PlayStation to revoke your access for more or less any reason, which basically means you do not actually own any of the content that you purchase digitally. You just have a license which gives you access to it as long as PlayStation allows you to have access to it. Then they announced that they will be shutting down physical disc production in January of 2028. So the only option to purchase new games will be via a digital license where they can revoke that license for any reason, which we've already seen given what they've done with some movies revoking access to them. They also cited changing consumer habits for the move, and that 78% of game purchases are now digital, so they are simply adapting to changing consumer preferences. However, it appears that the 78% figure also accounts for digital games that don't have a physical counterpart, and when you look at the data from other sources like the Insomniac leaks, you can see that many games actually sold more physical copies than digital. Now, this move would ultimately kill the used market and could give PlayStation an effective monopoly on digital game sales with little to no competition, which would allow them to set high prices on the store with no alternatives to help drive down those prices. Right now, you can still get games from the used market at a reduced price from places like eBay. Now, PlayStation also announced that they will be shutting down the PS3 and Vita digital storefronts in July of 2027, so anyone that does not already have the content will no longer be able to purchase it from the store. Luckily, thanks to jailbreaks on the prevalence of physical copies, much of this content has already been preserved, but in an all-digital future where there are no physical copies to turn to, when the digital stores are shut down, there will be no alternative places that you can go to purchase that content. This is why it's become even more important to be able to jailbreak your hardware, including future PlayStation consoles, as it gives you back control of your hardware and the content that runs on it. For example, with the PS5, you can take any game you have purchased digitally that is still runnable on the console or a disc-based game and create a DRM-free digital copy of that game that can be loaded on any jailbreakable PS5. This is a digital copy that cannot be stripped away from you. You can make multiple copies of it, store them in different locations, different devices, and also install and run those games whenever you want to on your own terms. And the same with PS4 games and games from older systems like PS1 and PS2 games that you can also run on a jailbroken PS5. Now, you can also apply patches to do things like unlock the frame rates, because there's a bunch of PlayStation 4 games that never got patched to actually utilize the extra performance of the PS5, where they're still locked at 30 frames per second. When you have a jailbreak, you have control over the system. You're able to apply patches that people have made to unlock those frame rates and push frame rates up to 60 frames per second or more on those games that were previously locked to 30 FPS. And then also older PS5s on firmware 7.61 and below can even run Linux, including gaming distros like SteamOS, Bazzite, and CachyOS, allowing you to have the PS5 double as a Steam machine to play your favorite PC games and emulators, and gain access to multiple digital storefronts to give you more options to purchase your games. But you can also reboot back into the PS5's operating system so you can still run your PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 games as well. So these recent developments from PlayStation may also increase the number of hackers trying to jailbreak the PS5, as the more restricted the platform becomes, the more of a need there will be to remove those restrictions. And that's what I personally love about jailbreaking, is the fact that it gives you back control over your device so that you can treat it as an open platform instead of a highly restricted closed ecosystem. Given everything that's been going on at the moment with PlayStation, it definitely feels like being able to jailbreak your console is more important than it ever has been, and it certainly will be going into the future. Or what could potentially happen is everybody just decides to go to PC, which is already an open platform, because PlayStation just becomes too restrictive. So in other news, we also got the release of 13.42, a new system software update for the PS5, where they just said they've improved system performance and stability. However, it does not look like they've actually patched, at least the jailbreak that is in private, the one that Gejina originally posted about. That continues to be working up to the latest firmwares, which would suggest that it's perhaps not being reported to Sony because they would have likely patched it by now. So perhaps Gejina is just keeping that one as a private exploit for the latest firmwares. And then, of course, when it eventually gets patched, if Sony discovers it through some other means, then Gejina will no longer be under any kind of conditions, any kind of NDA not to release it until disclosure is approved through HackerOne. So it could just get released as soon as it gets patched, which would be pretty interesting. We have seen a few exploits go that way in the past. Now, there's also been a lot of hype from this screenshot from kstuff showing kstuff running on Firmware 13.42. So obviously, kstuff has, provided this version of kstuff to Gejina or somebody else who has a private exploit on the latest firmware, and they're just running it and showing it running on the latest firmware. This doesn't necessarily mean we're any closer to any kind of public release at this time. Nothing as far as the status quo has really changed on that yet. That is where we are at the moment. We'll just have to wait until whatever private exploit gets patched before we'll see it get released. That is basically the general deal. There was also a release of kstuff version 9.09. This one is just for 3.0 to 12.70, which fixed the disable ASLR on 11.x and 12.x firmwares. This is address-based layout randomization, which is when you're creating cheats or you're trying to use any cheats where the addresses change whenever you reload the game, which was causing some cheats not to work for your PS4 and PS5 games. So the addresses effectively stay static, so if there were any cheats that were basically using static addresses, they would not have been working on the previous versions of kstuff because ASLR was not being disabled. Now that it is being disabled, those cheats should now work, and you can run your cheats for your PS4 and PS5 games using the cheats that are built into Elf Arsenal, or you can use the independent cheat runner as well. There's a relatively new build of the cheat runner also available that you can use to load your cheats for your PS4 and PS5 games. We also have an update to the Linux payload. So the Linux payload recently got support for firmware 7.61, which we covered in the previous update, but now we also have 6.50 and 7.20 support and 7.40 support now added for PS5 Linux as well. And also with the Linux images, we now have a releases section that contains the latest pre-built images for the 7.1.2 kernel. So instead of having to build the images yourself using the builder, you can instead just come in here and download any pre-built image you want and then just flash it directly onto your USB storage device so that you can get Linux up and running from an external drive. And finally, I've noticed that we've been seeing a lot more package building software that has come out recently that claim to be able to build fake packages for the PS5, although we don't have a way to run them yet. There's no kind of fake package method available yet, but we're seeing a lot of these pieces of software released recently that allow you to build packages and manage package files on the PS5. And this is mainly a result from the libprospero package library that was created by SpenGDK, which is basically a library that allows people who are making software to import that library so that they can manage package files and build a software tool around it. So that is why we're seeing so many of these applications pop up recently, is due to the release of this library here, libprospero package. And we also have a new DNS server from Earth Onion. So this is mainly for people using the UMTX2 hosts, so the ones using the web browser jailbreak. You can use 45.56.67.85 as your DNS address, your primary DNS, and it will of course block connections to Sony servers, and it will also redirect the user guide over to the UMTX2 web browser exploit, so you'll be able to load the web browser exploit from there. I'll update the description in my guides with this new address because the old one from Nomadic no longer works. Would still recommend using something like Nano DNS instead, because that runs locally on your PS5. So, with public DNS servers, you have the issue where if the DNS server goes down, or, if it has to go down for maintenance for a while, then you lose internet access, whereas if you're running a local DNS like Nano DNS on your own console, then you don't have those issues. So I still prefer Nano DNS generally than using a public DNS server, and also with public DNS servers, you have the issue where your ISP can override the DNS server and just force everything through their DNS, and then it does not block the updates and things can get updated which is also not great if you want a quick, convenient way to block updates while also getting an internet connection on your PS5 and be able to redirect the user guide straight to an exploit host so you can load the jailbreak directly from the user guide. If you're on an old enough firmware to use the UMTX2 host, then it looks like this is a pretty good option that you can use because Earth Onion, of course, is a well-known, respected developer in the scene who is now hosting his own DNS that you can use. So switching things up quite literally here, as well-known PlayStation exploit developer Gyejine has created a Userland exploit for the Nintendo Switch and the Switch 2, which is not based on WebKit or a save-based exploit. And this is a big deal because the previous Day 1 Userland exploit for the Switch 2 was save-based, which meant importing the save file through Nintendo's online service, which requires you to be on the latest firmware to use. So this exploit works on all firmwares, and the reason why WebKit was not targeted was due to the Switch 2's WebKit having pointer authentication code, which prevents ROP execution. Other native Switch 2 apps also have pointer authentication code and other mitigations like control flow integrity and execute-only memory, so it's likely that some legacy Switch app was actually used since it works on the Switch 1 and the Switch 2, and the original Switch applications don't seem to have those mitigations in place. The video shows the exploit running on the Switch 2. Once it completes, it spawns an error message, which is used to display hello from Switch 2. And then we see some familiar names from the PlayStation scene who are credited here, like Earth Onion, UFM42, and Cow, along with Reswitch Discord's Hex Keys or Hex KYZ. So this is still just a Userland exploit, and we would need at least a kernel exploit to get anything close to a jailbreak on the Switch 2. But this is a good step in the right direction, especially since it works on all current firmwares, including old firmwares, that are more likely to be vulnerable to additional exploits. So if you want to be able to exploit your Switch 2 in the future, obviously just keep it offline and do not let it install any future updates. So anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. That's going to do it here for this one. So hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. If you did,